The worst betrayal never comes from an enemy weapon, but from the smiles of those sharing my blood. Do you think me losing $900,000 is a mother's worst nightmare? No, the real horror was watching the son I spent my youth raising conspire with his wife's lover to destroy me. Grab a coffee, sit down, and listen to how I turned their blinding greed into a flawless, inescapable trap. Hello, dear listeners of James' Revenge Stories. Before we begin, I want to sincerely thank you for your continuous support. But sadly, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us with no budget to operate. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and keep creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or comments of this video. I am Genesis Black. I am 42 years old, a cybersecurity expert, and the founder of a tech security firm called Aegis Core Dynamics, based in Austin, Texas. Since I was 22 years old, I have worked like a woman possessed. I poured my blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights into building my empire from the ground up. I did it all for one reason: my only son, Liam. I wanted to give him the world I never had. So, when my company finally hit a massive financial milestone, I decided it was time to secure his future completely. I withdrew $900,000 from my personal fund. It was meant to be a late wedding gift for Liam and his wife, Harper, so they could finally buy that beautiful suburban mansion they had been dreaming of. I imagined the look of pure joy on their faces. I imagined the hugs, the tears of happiness, the feeling of a mother's ultimate triumph. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The Texas sun was casting long, golden shadows as I drove to their apartment. I had the cashier's check and the legal transfer papers tucked neatly into my designer handbag. I decided not to call ahead because I wanted this to be a complete surprise. When I reached their front door, I reached for the doorbell, but my hand froze mid-air. The door was slightly ajar. I recognized the blinking red light on the panel immediately. It was a network failure on their smart lock system, a temporary glitch in the mainframe. I smiled to myself, making a mental note to send one of my technicians over to upgrade their firewall. I pushed the door open just a fraction of an inch to announce my presence, but the words died in my throat. From the living room, I heard Harper's voice. It was not her usual sweet, polite tone that she used around me. It was low, sultry, and dripping with a dark excitement. She was talking on speakerphone. A man's voice responded, deep, unfamiliar, and incredibly arrogant. He introduced himself as Marcus, a black market financial broker. I stood perfectly still in the hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Marcus, baby," Harper purred. "The old woman is practically handing it to us. $900,000, clean and clear." "You are sure she does not suspect a thing?" Marcus asked, his voice crackling slightly through the phone's speaker. "Genesis is a tech genius, but she is an absolute fool when it comes to her precious boy," Harper laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. "Once she transfers the funds to our joint account, you run it through the shell company in Cyprus. We wash it clean and she will never be able to trace it back to us." My blood ran ice cold. My daughter-in-law was having an affair, and they were planning to steal my life's work to launder it overseas. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. But the worst was yet to come. The true horror, the kind that breaks a mother's soul into a million jagged pieces, was sitting right there on the couch. "Just make sure it is done fast," another voice spoke up. I stopped breathing. The hallway seemed to spin. It was Liam, my sweet, gentle Liam. He was sitting right there in the same room while his wife flirted with her lover and plotted my financial ruin. "Do not worry, man," Marcus said to my son. "You will get your $450,000, and I get to keep the business rolling." "As long as Harper stays with me," Liam muttered, his voice trembling with a pathetic mixture of desperation and greed. "I do not care what happens to my mother's money. Just do the transfer, Marcus. Half for you, half for us." Harper promised she would not leave me if we pulled this off. I leaned against the cold wall of the corridor. The check in my bag suddenly felt like a block of lead. My son knew. He knew about the affair. He knew about the scheme. He was so blindingly obsessed with a woman who despised him that he was willing to hand over his own mother to a criminal just to keep her from walking out the door. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with a sharp, terrifying clarity. The mother in me died right there in that dim hallway, and the cybersecurity architect woke up. The shock lasted exactly 4 minutes and 59 seconds. I leaned against the textured wallpaper of the corridor, feeling the irregular thumping of my heart gradually slow down into a steady, metronomic rhythm. In my line of work, panic is a critical vulnerability. Emotion is a backdoor that hackers exploit to breach your defenses. I had spent 20 years building firewalls, encrypting databases, and hunting down the most elusive cyber threats on the planet. I was not about to let a cheap con artist and a pathetic, desperate boy bypass my internal security protocols. The warm maternal instinct that had driven me here, the desire to see my son happy, evaporated into the stale air of the hallway. It was instantly replaced by the icy, calculating logic of a system administrator who had just detected a catastrophic data breach. My family was no longer my family. They were a hostile threat. I pressed my ear closer to the narrow gap, tuning out the ambient white noise of the building. The conversation inside was continuing, and the depth of their depravity was far worse than a simple money grab. "The initial transfer is only phase 1, Marcus was saying, his voice laced with arrogant confidence. "Once she trusts the new setup, you tell her to download my wealth management application onto her primary laptop. You tell her it is to monitor the offshore yields." Harper chuckled, a sound that made my skin crawl. "And then?" she asked. "And then," Marcus replied, "the application deploys a hidden payload. It bypasses her local encryption and gives me a direct tunnel into the servers of Aegis Core Dynamics. We are not just taking the $900,000, Liam. We are taking the core source code. I have buyers in Eastern Europe who will pay tens of millions for that kind of military-grade security architecture." My breath hitched, but my mind snapped into crystalline focus. They did not just want to drain my bank account. They wanted to burn my life's work to the ground. And Liam, the boy I had sung to sleep for years, was sitting right there, letting it happen. "Just make sure it cannot be traced back to us," my son whispered, his voice weak and pathetic. I slowly pulled my hand away from the door frame. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out the crisp cashier's check. $900,000. A symbol of a mother's unconditional sacrifice. I stared at my own signature at the bottom. It looked completely alien to me now. With deliberate, slow movements, I folded the thick paper in half, then in quarters. I tore it straight down the middle. The sound of the ripping paper was deafening to my own ears, but practically silent to the outside world. I tore it again and again, reducing the grand gesture of a lifetime to a handful of worthless confetti. I turned around and walked down the hallway, my footsteps completely muffled by the thick carpet. When I stepped out into the blinding Texas sunlight, I walked straight to the rusted iron grate of the storm drain at the edge of the sidewalk. I opened my hand and let the pieces flutter down into the dark, stagnant water below. Down there in the muck, alongside discarded wrappers and dead leaves, my motherhood was officially buried. I did not storm back up those stairs. I did not kick the door down, screaming and throwing wild accusations. That is what a victim does. And Genesis Black is never a victim. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket. My fingers flew across the screen, accessing the master control dashboard of my company. I had personally overseen the installation of the smart home and security cameras in their apartment building, an overprotective mother's gift to keep them safe. Now, it was my greatest weapon. I entered my overriding administrator credentials. The screen flickered, and suddenly, I had a crystal-clear, high-definition live feed of their living room. There was Liam, slumped on the sofa, staring at the floor. There was Harper, fixing her makeup while smiling at her phone. I hit the record button. The application immediately began capturing both the video and the crisp audio from the hidden microphones. I was securing the data packets, compiling an undeniable digital dossier of their criminal conspiracy. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the recording running silently in the background, uploading directly to an encrypted cloud server only I could access. I walked across the asphalt parking lot to my black SUV. I climbed into the driver's seat, the leather burning hot against my back, but I felt absolutely nothing. No tears blurred my vision. No sob escaped my lips. I gripped the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at the brick facade of their building. They wanted to play a game of digital deception. They wanted to introduce a virus into my system, but they clearly did not understand the architect they were dealing with. In the cybersecurity world, when you discover a threat actor probing your defenses, you do not immediately shut them out. You build a honeypot. You create a fake, irresistible target, a jar of sweet honey to lure the greedy bears in. You let them think they have won. You let them dig their claws in deep, and then you slam the trap shut. I started the engine, the low hum of the motor matching the dark, calculating machinery turning inside my head. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted, and it was going to destroy them. I navigated the downtown Austin traffic like a guided missile, pulling my black SUV into the underground parking garage of the most imposing glass high-rise in the financial district. I bypassed the receptionist on the 40th floor and marched straight into the corner office of Silas Vance. Silas was the sharpest, most ruthless corporate attorney in Texas, and my most trusted business partner. We had spent 2 decades building the impenetrable legal armor around Aegis Core Dynamics. He looked up from his mahogany desk, pushing his silver-rimmed glasses up his nose. He sensed the drastic shift in my atmospheric pressure immediately. I did not bother with pleasantries. I dropped my leather bag on his desk and told him I needed a wealth transfer contract drafted by the end of the hour. But I made it absolutely clear that this document was not going to be a gift. It was going to be an execution warrant. I paced the length of his office, dictating the parameters with the cold precision of a machine. I instructed him to structure the $900,000 not as a standard cash wire, but as a highly restricted electronic trust. The legal classification of this trust was the most crucial element of the trap. We formally designated the funds as a federal security grant, legally tethering the money directly to the corporate treasury of my company, an entity that held highly classified government contracts. Silas's fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard, the rapid clacking sounding like bullets hitting concrete, as I outlined the poison pill. Hidden deep within Section 4, Paragraph C, buried underneath thick layers of dense, suffocating legal jargon, was the trigger condition. The clause explicitly stipulated that if 1 single cent of those funds was transferred outside the physical borders of the United States, or routed into any financial institution lacking transparent, registered corporate standing, the transaction would instantly trigger a breach of federal security protocols. By signing this document, any unauthorized movement of the money would no longer be considered a minor civil dispute over family assets. It would automatically constitute first-degree federal financial fraud, wire fraud, and international money laundering. I was essentially wrapping my money in high-voltage federal wire. While Silas meticulously finalized the lethal paperwork, I opened my secure laptop to monitor the company network. My hands hovered over the keyboard as my proprietary intrusion detection system suddenly flashed a silent, amber warning across my screen. Someone was aggressively knocking on the digital front door of my company network. I quickly traced the incoming connection request. It was cloaked behind an anonymous virtual private network, routing through a server in Eastern Europe. But the behavioral signature was sloppy and impatient. I knew exactly who it was. It was Marcus. But what made the blood freeze in my veins all over again was the specific digital key he was using to try and pick the lock. The security log files showed repeated attempts to authenticate the firewall using a legacy alphanumeric password. It was an old, highly complex administrative bypass code I had used on my home network months ago. The realization hit me like a physical strike. Liam must have stood behind my chair one evening, quietly memorizing my keystrokes, and handed that master key directly to his wife's lover. A lesser network architect would have panicked and permanently blacklisted his internet protocol address to lock him out. But I was actively hunting now. I wanted this rat right exactly where I could see him. I typed a rapid sequence of terminal commands, silently bypassing my own primary security firewalls. I did not block his entry. Instead, I quietly unlocked a digital side door, creating an intentional backdoor vulnerability. I intercepted his incoming connection away from the genuine core mainframes and smoothly funneled him directly into a quarantined, isolated dummy server. It was a perfectly constructed digital mirage. I rapidly populated this fake server with thousands of files cleverly disguised as top-tier classified source code. In reality, it was completely useless, compiled garbage data. However, woven deeply into the hidden headers of those dummy files was a highly sophisticated, persistent digital beacon. It was a military-grade geolocation tracking algorithm specifically designed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for elite counterintelligence operations. The moment Marcus downloaded even a single byte of that fake code to his local machine, the tracker would silently embed itself into his hardware motherboard. It would immediately begin broadcasting his exact physical coordinates, device registry, and network identity directly to a federal database in Washington. I watched the screen as Marcus breached the fake door, completely unaware that he had just locked himself inside a federal prison cell. I chose a table by the window at the Monarch, the most obscenely expensive steakhouse in downtown Austin. It was the kind of establishment where the lighting was deliberately dim to hide the wrinkles of aging billionaires. The jazz music played softly in the background, and the menus did not display any prices. I arrived 30 minutes early to mentally prepare my performance. I let my shoulders slump forward slightly. I rubbed away some of my concealer in the restroom to make the dark circles under my eyes appear more prominent. Tonight, I was not the ruthless architect of a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity empire. I was just an exhausted, overworked, middle-aged mother who was blindly in love with her only child. When Liam and Harper finally walked through the massive mahogany double doors, my stomach executed a slow, sickening roll, but I forced a warm, weary smile onto my face. Harper spotted me and practically glided across the dining room floor. She threw her arms around me, her expensive floral perfume suffocating me for a brief second as she pressed her cheek against mine. "Oh, Genesis, it is so wonderful to see you," she gushed, pulling back to give me a look of intensely practiced sympathy. "You look so tired. Are you working too hard again?" I patted her hand gently, playing my part to perfection. "Just wrapping up the financial quarter, sweetheart. You know how stressful the tech industry is." But my eyes were not focused on her fake smile. They were locked onto the handbag slung casually over her left shoulder. It was a limited edition, Himalayan crocodile skin designer bag. I recognized the exact model instantly, not because I followed high fashion trends, but because exactly 3 weeks ago, my automated financial algorithms had flagged a critical anomaly. Someone had successfully bypassed the two-factor authentication on a secondary bank account I kept strictly as a medical emergency fund. I had spent 2 hours tracing the unauthorized withdrawal of $45,000 directly to a high-end luxury boutique in Paris. Seeing that stolen money hanging casually off her shoulder, paraded right in front of my face at a family dinner, required every ounce of my professional self-control to keep my crystal wine glass from shattering in my grip. We ordered our food. Liam sat opposite me, adjusting his tailored suit jacket. He looked visibly nervous. His eyes kept darting around the restaurant, focusing on the waiters, the chandeliers, the window, anywhere but direct eye contact with me. Good, I thought to myself. He should be terrified. "We are so excited about the new house plan, Mom," Liam said, his voice carrying that soft, boyish tone he always used when he was about to ask for a favor. He reached across the white linen tablecloth and gently covered my hand with his. It was a gesture that used to melt my heart completely. Now his touch felt like the cold, slimy scales of a venomous snake. But we are honestly more worried about your health. You cannot keep running the company and managing all your personal wealth by yourself. You are burning yourself out. Harper chimed in immediately, taking a delicate sip of her sparkling water while her other hand rested under the table, undoubtedly texting her lover, Marcus. Liam is exactly right, Genesis. You have given us so much already. You should really step back. Let us take over the heavy lifting with the financial management from now on. We just want you to rest and enjoy your life. The dramatic irony of the moment was so incredibly thick you could carve it with a steak knife. Here they were, a cheating wife and a complicit, greedy son, sitting in a Michelin-starred restaurant, feigning deep, loving concern for my well-being while actively plotting to steal my life's work and hand it over to a black market criminal. They were so utterly convinced of their own brilliance, so arrogant in their assumption that they had successfully manipulated a lonely, tired old woman. I let out a heavy, theatrical sigh, squeezing Liam's hand affectionately before pulling mine away. You are right. Both of you are right. I am tired. I want to see you two settled and happy. That is the only reason I asked you here tonight. I reached down into my leather briefcase and pulled out the thick, cream-colored manila envelope Silas had prepared for me earlier that afternoon. I laid it gently on the table right next to the glowing candlelight. The air at the table instantly shifted. The fake concern vanished from Harper's eyes entirely, replaced immediately by the sharp, hungry gleam of a predator spotting a wounded animal. Liam sat up straighter in his chair, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "This is the authorization paperwork," I said softly, keeping my voice low and incredibly soothing. "It is the formal transfer documentation for the $900,000. I had my corporate lawyers draft it up today. Once you sign the acknowledgement on the final page, the banking system will release the funds directly into your joint account by tomorrow morning." Harper did not even try to hide her desperate eagerness. She lunged forward across the table, her manicured nails practically clawing at the envelope. She yanked out the thick stack of legal documents. I sat back and watched her eyes scan the first page, completely ignoring the dense, complex paragraphs of legal definitions. She was only looking for the dollar amount and the blank signature line. She hastily flipped straight to page 3. Right there, buried perfectly in the middle of a massive block of incomprehensible, microscopic legal jargon, was the poison pill. It was the absolute trigger clause that legally classified the money as a federal security asset and turned any offshore transfer into a first-degree federal felony. If she had possessed even a fraction of the intelligence she thought she had, she would have stopped reading and hired an independent lawyer to review the contract. But blinding greed makes people foolish. "It all looks completely standard to me," Harper declared confidently, sliding the heavy paperwork toward Liam and aggressively thrusting a gold pen into his trembling hand. "Sign it, honey. The real estate broker is waiting for the confirmation." Liam hesitated for a fraction of a second. The pen hovered over the paper. He looked up at me, his eyes searching my face for any sign of a trap, any hint of suspicion. I gave him my warmest, most trusting, unconditional motherly smile. I nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead, Liam," I whispered. "It is your future." He swallowed hard, lowered his head, and pressed the pen to the heavy paper. The faint scratching sound of the ink binding him permanently to a federal crime echoed in my ears like a beautiful symphony. He signed his full name on the dotted line. Harper quickly snatched the pen from his fingers and scribbled her own signature right next to his. They pushed the document back across the table to me, their faces glowing with the triumphant satisfaction of a successful heist. They firmly believed they had won. They thought they had played me perfectly. But as I carefully slid the signed execution warrant back into my briefcase, the only emotion I felt was the icy, absolute certainty that their countdown to total destruction had officially reached 0. Exactly 3 days after that dinner, the digital tripwire finally snapped. I was sitting in the heavily air-conditioned subterranean control room of my home office, entirely bathed in the cool blue glow of my security monitors. The secret surveillance feed from their apartment building flickered to life. The audio channel crackled, immediately filling my silent sanctuary with the sickening sound of clinking glass and raucous laughter. They were hosting a private celebration. Liam, Harper, and Marcus. The audacity was almost impressive. Marcus was leaning casually against the kitchen island, a crystal flute of expensive champagne resting in his hand, looking completely at home in the apartment my son paid for. Harper was wearing a sheer silk robe, standing dangerously close to Marcus, whispering something in his ear while Liam was practically standing right beside them, blindly pouring more champagne into their glasses. They were celebrating their impending wealth. They truly believed the money was fully cleared and ready for the final extraction. On my primary workstation, a massive red warning banner abruptly flashed across the main screen. The financial gateway was opening. Marcus set his champagne glass down and pulled a sleek silver laptop onto the marble counter. He cracked his knuckles, a theatrical gesture of a man who thought he was a master hacker. He opened the portal using the precise banking credentials I had authorized through that poisoned contract. I leaned forward in my leather chair, my eyes tracking every single keystroke he made in real time. He bypassed the local firewalls exactly as I had allowed him to. He targeted the $900,000 trust fund. I watched the destination routing code appear on my monitor. It was not a local joint account. It was a completely anonymous shell entity registered in the Cayman Islands. The absolute arrogance of it was breathtaking. He was committing international wire fraud right from my son's kitchen table. "Are we ready to become rich?" Marcus asked aloud, his voice dripping with unbearable smugness over the hidden microphone. "Just hit the button, baby," Harper cheered, raising her glass in a toast. Marcus pressed the enter key. In that exact microsecond, my custom algorithmic trap slammed entirely shut. Down in my server matrix, the system instantly recognized the international routing attempt. It engaged the Federal Security Protocol immediately. But I did not want them to panic just yet. I needed them completely docile and unaware. So, on Marcus's screen, I fed them a beautifully rendered graphical lie. A loading circle appeared, spinning smoothly alongside a message that read, "Transaction processing, please wait." They cheered loudly, hugging each other in a grotesque display of greed. They had absolutely no idea that the money had instantly been frozen by a federal banking embargo. But Marcus was not finished. Driven by absolute blinding greed, he minimized the banking window and launched a secondary terminal. He connected directly to the back door I had left wide open for him 3 days ago. He was going for the Aegis Core dynamic source code. My system monitors screamed with silent alarms as he initiated the download from the fake quarantine server. He thought he was stealing tens of millions of dollars worth of military-grade encryption. What he was actually downloading was the highly classified Federal Bureau of Investigation geolocation beacon. The moment the progress bar hit 100%, the beacon permanently fused itself to his hardware motherboard. My screen lit up with his exact global positioning coordinates, permanently locking him into a federal cyber espionage dragnet. The countdown clock had officially hit 0. Right at that very moment, Harper's cell phone rang loudly, slicing through their celebratory laughter. I watched her pick it up, her face lighting up with absolute ecstasy. "Yes, this is she," Harper said into the receiver. "Oh, wonderful. We will be right there." She hung up the phone and practically jumped into Liam's arms. "That was the real estate broker," she shrieked, her voice echoing sharply through the surveillance feed. "The final purchasing procedures are entirely complete. The seller accepted the terms. They want us to come down to the office right now to sign the closing papers and pick up the keys to our new mansion." Liam grabbed his car keys off the counter, his face flushed with the kind of pure, unadulterated joy that shattered my heart for the very last time. "Let us go," Liam shouted. "Marcus, you come too. We celebrate at the new house." They rushed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind them, leaving their half-empty champagne glasses sitting on the counter. They bounded down the hallway, completely drunk on their own perceived brilliance. They were blissfully unaware that the real estate office did not have a set of house keys waiting for them. They were happily rushing out the door, sprinting enthusiastically straight into their own execution. The heavy double doors of the executive suite swung open with a soft, expensive whoosh. Liam, Harper, and Marcus walked into the room, practically floating on a cloud of unearned arrogance. Harper was already reaching into her designer bag, undoubtedly to pull out a celebratory pen, while Marcus wore a smirk so wide it looked permanently carved into his face. They expected to see a smiling real estate broker handing over the shiny keys to a multi-million-dollar suburban mansion. Instead, the room was dead silent, and the temperature felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. There was no broker. There was no champagne. There was only a long, polished mahogany table. I sat completely still at the head of it. To my immediate right sat Silas Vance, his hands neatly folded over a thick, heavily stamped legal dossier, and standing quietly against the back wall, blocking the only other exit, were 3 large men wearing remarkably plain, dark suits. Harper's confident stride broke instantly. Her stiletto heel caught on the thick carpet, and the smug smile vanished from her face, replaced by a mask of sudden, utter confusion. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes darting quickly toward the 3 men by the wall. His criminal instincts were finally kicking in, but it was far too late. Liam just stared at me, his mouth slightly open, completely oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "Mom?" Liam asked, his voice echoing weakly in the massive room. "What is going on? Where is the agent?" I did not answer him. I did not even blink. I simply reached out and pressed a single silver button on the remote control resting next to my hand. The high-fidelity surround sound speakers embedded in the ceiling hissed for a fraction of a second before the recording began to play. "The old woman is practically handing it to us. $900,000, clean and clear." Harper's voice practically purred from above, bouncing off the cold walls. Harper gasped loudly, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Marcus's face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of ash gray. Then the second voice played. "I do not care what happens to my mother's money. Just do the transfer, Marcus. Half for you, half for us." Liam's legs gave out. He stumbled backward, hitting the heavy leather chair behind him. The undeniable audio evidence of his ultimate betrayal hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Silas Vance calmly picked up the dossier, dropped it onto the center of the table with a loud, authoritative thud, and nodded to the men in the back. The 3 men stepped forward in perfect unison. Leather wallets flipped open, revealing heavy silver badges that caught the overhead light. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," the lead agent announced, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Marcus, Harper, and Liam, you are all under arrest." "Arrest?" Harper shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. "For what? We did not do anything. You are being charged with first-degree federal wire fraud, conspiracy to embezzle federal security assets, and corporate espionage involving the attempted theft of classified intellectual property," the agent continued, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Given the federal security classifications involved in that contract, you are each looking at a mandatory minimum of up to 20 years in a federal penitentiary." The click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut around Marcus's wrists was the sound that finally shattered their alliance. The illusion of their sophisticated criminal partnership dissolved into pure, animalistic panic. "It was him!" Harper screamed at the top of her lungs, stepping away from her husband and pointing a shaking, manicured finger right at her lover's face. "Marcus manipulated me. He set the whole thing up. I did not touch any computer." Marcus violently yanked his shoulder against the federal agent's grip, spitting back with equal venom. "Shut your mouth, you lying snake! And you!" He turned his furious gaze toward Liam. "Tell them the truth. You're the one who gave me the master administrator password. Liam is the mastermind who handed over the network keys." Facing the cold, hard steel of the handcuffs and the terrifying reality of 2 decades behind bars, Liam completely broke. He collapsed onto the floor, the knees of his expensive tailored suit slamming into the carpet. He crawled toward my chair, tears streaming down his face, his chest heaving with ugly, pathetic sobs. "Mom, please," Liam begged, reaching out to grab the hem of my skirt. "Please do not let them take me. I am so sorry." "I did not want to hurt you, I swear. I only did it because I loved her so much. I was terrified she would leave me. Please, Mom, forgive me." I looked down at the weeping, broken man on the floor. I searched my heart for a shred of pity, a single drop of maternal instinct. But there was nothing left. The fire was entirely burned out. I looked at him not as a mother looking at her child, but as an engineer looking at a piece of highly destructive malware that had finally been permanently isolated and purged from the network. "I gave you a solid, impenetrable foundation, Liam," I said. My voice was perfectly calm, sharp, and cold as ice. "But you chose to build your life on a swamp." I pulled my skirt out of his grasp, stood up, and turned my back to him. I walked out of the boardroom, the sound of my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor, completely drowning out his desperate, wailing cries. A few months later, the autumn air in Texas was crisp and clear. Liam, Harper, and Marcus were all sitting in federal holding cells, aggressively turning on each other as they awaited their final sentencing hearings. I was standing on a manicured green lawn, surrounded by bright, eager faces. I had taken the entire $900,000 and completely repurposed it. I established the Genesis Black Foundation. It was a fully funded, non-profit academic trust dedicated exclusively to providing full-ride scholarships and mentorship to orphaned female students who demonstrated a fierce, undeniable passion for computer science and cybersecurity. Standing there, watching those brilliant young women walk through the newly dedicated campus doors, I realized the most profound truth of my life. The most valuable asset in this world is never the money you hold in your bank account. The true wealth lies in having the wisdom to invest everything you have into the people who actually deserve it. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for staying with me until the very end of this journey. Where in the world are you tuning in from today? Please let me know down in the comments. I would love to read them. If you found today's story engaging and worthwhile, please consider helping our channel with just a $1 donation. You can easily scan the PayPal QR code on your screen or use the PayPal link provided in the description or the pinned comment below. Your generous support allows us to pay our incredibly hard-working team, helping them provide for their families and empowering us to keep creating more high-quality stories for you. Thank you for your time, and please, stay safe out there.